posting the recording, the slide deck, and questions and answers, right, that we will have later on in the meeting. Another thing is that we did post in the chat, and I'll have that posted again here now, a link to where questions can be submitted. So as you get questions or have questions throughout the meeting, we'll address all those at the very end. So if you could use that link to submit your questions, we'll work through all the different topics and presenters as part of this, and we'll address those questions at the end of the meeting. So again, we'll have that posted again here in the chat. So as we work through the agenda, right, we'll open it up as is customary here at National Grid with a safety message. Right, we'll talk a little bit about an update to COVID and force majeure, right, that we've all lived with here for over a year. We'll dive into the bulk of the presentation, which is a walkthrough of the various interconnection processes. And we'll even introduce, a new team here at National Grid that Sean Diamond has taken over. And just a reminder to stay on mute and no cameras for bandwidth reasons. Appreciate it, everybody. We got a couple of topics here at the end, right, around the Clean Peaks program, some talking points around a kayak contribution in aid of construction, as we've seen a number of questions pop up around that recently. Some general communications at the end before we dive into the Q&A session. So we'll be working here over the next couple of hours, and we'll do our best to get in as many questions as we possibly can as we work towards that 12 o'clock hour. But with that, we'll dive into the safety message. So yeah, so the safety message, right, that I want to ultimately dive into, right, is really a big pet peeve of mine, is sort of neighborhood driving, right? You know, I live sort of on a sleepy street, right, but it is a little bit of a pass through, right? It's mostly the neighborhood people, right, as they're driving to their houses. They tend to be a little bit in a rush. I have a couple of kids who are, playing in the yard often with the neighbors, and either riding bikes or playing ball in the front yard and those different things. And I feel like sometimes my neighbors, right, they try to hit new speed records going between stop signs. Right. So I always like to bring it up when I have the opportunity around, just paying attention, right? Don't drive on a side street like it's a double yellow line type of road, right? Or a highway. Right. There's no need to accelerate and gain that extra half a second if you're going, right, 100 feet in between stop signs. All right, try to pay attention to ultimately where you are and adjust your driving as necessary, right? We're always in a rush trying to get somewhere. We're always running late. We always want to get somewhere as soon as we possibly can, but does that half second really help in the grand scheme of things? And the risk is just incredibly high. So I know that we've had to talk to some of our neighbors who are driving up and down the street and just mention to them, right? And like I said, the balls end up in the street often, and is my biggest fear, and I assume a lot of other people's biggest fears, is that someone is going to be going too fast, something's going to end up in the street, my kid's going to follow, and something bad's going to happen. So so just kind of keep that in mind, right? And just be conscious of the differences between driving on a main road, driving on a highway, and driving within neighborhoods. So quick safety message there. Diving into COVID and force majeure, right? So the company is pretty much back to blue sky, sort of within our normal working processes, right? Normal working behaviors, right? My group CEI is working pretty much at full capacity here, along with the engineering groups that we're working with. We are still seeing some issues in supply chain. right? Whether that is directly with National Grid or some of our suppliers within their supply chain. So we do have some material issues that continue to pop up. Right, and we'll continue to monitor resourcing issues and those type of things as we move forward. With that said, right, National Grid back on March 27th of 2020 put a force majeure in place around COVID overall. That is still in place, right? So even with the state of emergency being lifted, with some of the restrictions that have been lifted, we've kept the force majeure in place because of those supply chain issues that we are ultimately still experiencing, and we'll continue to monitor that, right? And at the point that we as the company feel as though there are no potential remaining impacts, we'll look to lift that force majeure, but just want to make sure everybody knows that sort of blanket force majeure is still in place. And as we see specific project impacts, we deliver a specific force majeure notice. So don't think that just because that's in place you're directly affected here at this point, or you won't know when and if you're directly affected. We will let you know, and we will work through the normal force majeure process to make sure you are informed of any of those impacts. So as we move into the next slide and into the process discussions, I'll hand it off to Jesse, and I will just do a quick reminder again about please put your mics on mute. I'm going to go off camera now, and the rest of the presenters will remain off camera. So we ask everybody to do the same for bandwidth reasons. And again, if you have any questions, please submit them through that link, and we'll get to them at the end of the meeting. But Jesse, I'll hand it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Will. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yesenia Rosa. I also go by Jesse. I am the senior specialist on the application development team here within CEI. So once you submit your applications, my team is reviewing them. Next slide, please. I'm going to be going over the simplified process with you this morning. So on this slide, we'll just go through what the simplified process is. The simplified criteria consists of a UL listed 1741 SA inverter-based system with power rating of 15 kW or less on a single phase service on a radial feed, or a UL listed 1741 SA inverter-based system with the power rating of 25 kW on a three-phase service on a radial feed. The simplified process does not apply for non-listed inverters or other generators, aggregate generation capacity of listed inverters that exceed the above mentioned limits, or projects that do not pass the simplified process screen. Next slide, please. On this slide, we just go over the steps. So initially, you submit your application. It goes into a simplified queue. We review it. We provide you conditional approval. At that point, you construct your system. Then the next step would be the witness test or your completion documents. And then we order your meter. And once we set that meter, you are provided your authorization to interconnect. And we also have the link here for those process steps. Next slide, please. Right here, we have the simplified review path. So when you submit your case, you receive an acknowledged receipt of application. We have 10 business days to then review the application for completeness. At that point, once we do review it and we deem the application complete, we provide you the conditional approval. After that comes the complete review of all the screens, which is 15 to 20 days. And then the agreement is sent out. Total maximum days is about 25 days, 30 days in the case of failure of the screen in number 5. But that really doesn't pertain too much to simplified unless that transformer is overloaded. Next slide, please. Some common holds and concerns that we do see in the simplified process when it pertains to the application. Please be sure that the application information matches the customer's bill account. So the name, the address, the account number, and the meter number should all match that bill account when you submit your application in your case. Do not forget to include that account number and meter number on the application. We have seen several cases come in where the application is missing those numbers. It is recommended that the customer information on the application is copied directly from the electric bill. That way there is no misinformation or discrepancies between the two. Wait to construct the system until you receive the conditional approval. This is important because if you do construct that system before you are granted the conditional approval, and we do check that transformer and that transformer is overloaded, that can cause some voltage issues. So it is very important to wait till you do get that conditional approval to then construct the system. Customer information on the application should match the application rules in your case. So your phone number, your email, your customer name should all match in the application rules the same way that it is on that bill account and on that bill that they provide you. After conditional approval, you do receive the service upgrade form within your case. So at that point, you would go into the case, complete that service upgrade form. We tend to see that a number of cases will go into completion documents and that service upgrade form isn't filled out yet. It just makes it a longer process for you to get that meter set because your work order hasn't been cleared by the inspector, but your completion documents are in. So if you do that right after you get the conditional approval, then you'll have that work order number ready and available for that inspector when he comes out to inspect your system. The completion package, we have the wire inspector call that work order in is something that we see as a common issue when we get to the completion document stage. So which is why it is a better habit to get that work order completed right as soon as you get that conditional approval. That way you already have that number and that inspector would be able to call it in, and then you can submit your completion documents and everything is already in place for us to be able to order that meter. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot of where you would find the service work order number. So if you go to your case and you hit your related tab, you'll be able to find the work order number there, and you would also be able to see if that work order has been called in and completed by the inspector of that city or town. Next slide, please. Some common questions and concerns for residential storage. Both the solar and AC coupled storage are included in the system size when determining if a system will be simplified or expedited. This is part of the triage questions. So it's very important that when you fill out when you're in that triage section of your case, that you put in the actual AC size, because that also determines if your case goes down the simplified or expedited path. So the storage is not included in the size for net metering. For example, a 10 kW single phase solar system with a 7 kW of AC storage would follow the expedited process because it is over 15 kW on a single phase. However, the net metering is capped at the 10 kW. In Mass, the storage with net metering solar that charges from the grid cannot export to the grid. So it's important that your one line does mention how the system is charging and if it is exporting to the grid. That is something that we look for on the one line when we do the review. So that is important to include on that one line, a little note somewhere. If the system is participating in MassMart, all generation must be captured by the MassMart meter. So just something to keep conscious of is making sure that, you know, when you are drawing up your one lines, you are making sure that that smart meter is capturing the generation. Next slide, please. And that'll be the end of my simplified process. I will be now passing it on to JJ for screening. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jesse. Good morning, everyone. I'm JJ, and I'm going to be covering the pre-application, application, and screening review processes with everyone this morning. Next slide, please. So pre-applications are required for all cases 250 kW or greater. Pre-apps they're pretty important, especially for the larger cases, as they provide nearest feeder circuit information, system constraints, and feeder challenges. Per the 1955D, any cases, pre-app cases 250 kW or below require a $100 fee, 250 to 500 require a $250 fee. In all cases, half of meg or larger require a $750 fee. Pre-applications, we require 4 basic things for any pre-app. It's the proposed site location address, the aggregate system size, the generation type, whether it's solar, CHP, wind, or hydro, and an uploaded screenshot of the proposed site using any web mapping platform like Google Maps, Bing, or an assessor's map. All pre-apps are completed within 10 business days, and we will provide circuit information, substation information, phases, usually the distance to a substation, or whether you're in a network or non-network area. Next slide, please. So this is what a pre-app report looks like, and I apologize, I know you can't really see how to crunch it up to get it in here, but the first page goes over all that information that it includes, including any feeder challenges, the capacity of the feeder, all the connected DG or pending DG on that feeder. The second page shows all the additional notes about the distribution system in that area. It can cover if there's like anything on an ASO study, if there's ongoing group studies, if it's in a challenging feeder area, or any other important information to help me make a better decision when moving forward to the applications. Next slide, please. Third page of the pre-app report has all of these useful links. It has the ESP 750 for electrical standards, the 756 for parallel generation requirements, the tariff, and anything you need basically about the interconnection process when applying for a new site. Next slide, please. The last 3 pages of a pre-app report show the application checklist, and it details everything depending on the system size that's required on the application if you decide to move forward after the pre-app report is reviewed. Next slide. So interconnection applications are required for all cases. All the items required are on that pre-app checklist at the end of the pre-app report from that checklist that was on the page before. All application reviews are completed within 10 business days. All submissions require complete application form, the required fee, the billing account number, system size, equipment assets, account location, site plan, line diagram, site control documentation, tech sheets, and any legal information documents. And for the larger projects, anything over half a meg, they usually can require anti-islanding forms, UL certificates for any of the inverters or equipment being used, battery storage narrative if there's going to be any battery storage. Next slide, please. On the application, some of the commonly missed items that lead to application holds during the process are missing billing account numbers, missing service work request numbers, missing site control, load rejection over voltage letters, anti-islanding forms, curtailment letters. On the line diagrams, missing electrical PE stamps, protective settings for the relaying. On the site plan, missing the point of common coupling or the nearest company pole number or piece of equipment near the site to determine where we're going to have the POI for the site, and then the 20-foot wide access road comments so that we know that we can get our personnel and equipment to the site. Next slide, please. So some of the application reviews, the company will not provide any transformers larger than 300 kVA when primary metering is the least cost to serve option. All commercial meters and disconnects are required to be grouped together, and that will be determined by the metering department during the construction process. Any existing metering located on a pad mounted transformer, unless it's a behind the meter system, will need to be relocated. All MA smart meter installations require disconnecting means on both the line and load side of the meter. Any expedited cases that need further study will require all of the documentation required for standard projects. So if it's deemed during a screening that an application or a screening needs to go to further review, and the application didn't require those documents, then it will require all of the standard documents to proceed further. And then no work should begin until the metering department has been contacted while in construction to have all the final locations approved. Next slide, please. So screening is required for all expedited and standard projects. Some of the things we check during screening are if the project is on a radial system network, if everything is UL 1741 SA listed, if the proposed service configuration will work for the project, does a proposed DG on the system pass sufficient feedback and islanding screenings. If any of those screening checkpoints fail, we usually require an impact study. It'll go into a more detailed study to make sure that it can be interconnected onto the system before we issue an ISA. All expedited screenings are completed within 25 business days. All standard projects are completed within, our screenings are completed within 20 business days. Every proposed project on a network or a non-effectively grounded system requires further study. Next slide, please. Some of the potential system constraints that lead to further study are ongoing area studies, challenging feeders, hosting capacity. If a feeder just has too much DG oversaturation, we need to send it to further study to see how we can interconnect the system. Any substation or feeder reconfigurations, anything on a non-effectively grounded or ungrounded feeder. Next slide, please. And I will pass this off to Mike, who's going to go over the expedited review process.
Okay, thanks, JJ. All right, we'll start with the first slide for expedited cases. So our expedited criteria, basically following along on what Jesse had said with the simple cases, we're on the other side of that. So a single phase customer with a listed single phase inverter based system with a power rating greater than 15 kW on a radial feed, that would go into expedited, as well as the three phase systems greater than 25 kW on the radial feed. Any project that did not pass the simplified process screens, typically those will be those many residential projects that have an overloaded transformer. Those would then become an expedited project if there is some construction needed. Non-simplified projects that do not require an impact study. So if they don't require an impact study but they're not simplified, they will fall into that expedited window. The maximum size of supplemental review is based on the review of these screens. Next slide. Okay, so the process steps. If you have a system greater than 250 kW, you are required to go through the pre-app start before you go into applications. The smaller jobs will then funnel in together into the expedited application queue. These will then be reviewed for basically the same. Certain ones will be reviewed just like they do in screening for document completeness, looking for all of the checking the boxes as far as one lines, legal documents, etc. In the screening process with engineering review, if it's determined that a supplemental review is required, we would go through the process of doing a supplemental draft and an agreement, and then using our engineers to get a little bit further detail to come up with cost. At that time, we would then give an ISA and give conditional approval to construct the system. If it did not follow the supplemental review and it was straightforward and no system improvements were needed, or it was just a standard upgrade, again, we would establish an ISA, whether there was cost or no cost, and we would deliver that to you. If construction was needed, once it was paid for, National Grid would do the construction in the field. Upon completion of your work and our work, we would then follow the commissioning memo process in lieu of a witness test on expedited cases. So typically we will go commissioning memo and completion documents rather than a witness test. With that falls within the completion document review. We will then order the meter, set the meter. If there is a wireless meter, once we communicate with that, we would then be able to authorize to interconnect, and we would send that email to you. Next slide. The review path. So we would start with eligible, facilities. So we're looking for listed inverters. When that app comes in, we have 3 days to acknowledge receipt of that. That is done automatically through the portal, so you will get that fairly quickly. The app review is 10 days, and that is 10 business days, not on hold. So if there's something missing, it's pushed on hold. That is not contributing to the 10 days. So we will get that out within that 10 days. Once assigned to a screener, there's 25 business days to proceed with all the screening and to determine if it needs supplemental review or it can be given in ISA. If screens are not passed, the company may require to do a supplemental review agreement before providing an interconnection service agreement. Key threshold is if an aggregate generation is less than 67% of the minimum load on the feeder, other screens review voltage quality, reliability, and safety to reduce the potential need for impact studies. Relay control system must be well defined to make supplemental review easier. Once we are in that process of drafting the ISA, it will say draft ISA on the portal. We have 10 business days that we will get that out to you. So the total life cycle to this point would be 45 days if a supplemental review was not required, and 65 days if we did go through the supplemental review. Construction schedules will vary depending on the scope of the work. And again, the notice witness test for most of our expedited cases, they will go through the COC process, the commissioning memo, in order to proceed to order the meter and then go to ATI. Next slide, please. Some of the common errors that we see in completion documents, commissioning memos, and will come in and they'd be missing some information. So we do this again, instead of a witness test, this commissioning memo should have a 2-second shutdown when the disconnect's open, 5 minutes before restart when disconnect is closed, and confirm that the system matches the as-built, and also with signature and date. So we want that as-built to match, we want it to match the one line that was originally approved. If there's any changes, they have to be notified on the as-built, and we want that signature and date on that as-built to match the commissioning memo. Lastly, on that commissioning memo, please list the inverter relay frequencies and trip time settings in the table. Thank you. Next slide. Common errors that we also find in completion documents is, as I kind of mentioned, is it must be PE stamped and signed, dated by the person that can perform the commissioning test. So the signatures and dates must match. Pictures. The meter picture should show the permanent plaque visible to eye level that includes a warning about the generator installed. We should also have a picture of the AC utility disconnect switch. If it's in a group or adjacent to the utility revenue meter, then permanent plaque is visible at eye level that clearly identifies the location of the AC utility disconnect is required. So on the existing, if it's a behind the meter system and we have an existing meter that we're going to exchange, that should be noted that there's a placard that this is a dual power source. And on that mass smart production meter, we want to have that it's a production meter noted on that. As well as the AC disconnect switch. If these are not near each other, we want to have that placard also describe the location of them so that they can be found by National Grid as well as anyone else who had to access, whether it was a first responder, et cetera. Next slide. For Massachusetts projects greater than 60 kW, evidence of insurance is required. So that form folder will be loaded to your case and you can upload that with your completion documents. Our risk team will review that. One of the issues that we sometimes get in that on some of the projects that have been around a little bit longer, That date may not be effective when you go to interconnect. So we just want to make sure that we have one that is in force, and it probably is, but we need to have the current date. On QF systems, we do require the Schedule A, a W9 and an ACH for projects greater than 60 kW, and the supplier enrollment form at this point is also requested with the completion documents on QF projects. Next slide, please. Metering reminder. Projects greater than 60 kW in mass will require interval metering info. So I'm sorry, they just require interval metering. So that would be a wireless system or a phone line. We prefer the wireless meters versus a phone line. In those rare instances where you cannot get signals, we can use a copper wired system. Those will have to be dedicated and terminated at the meter location. The line must be 100% copper. Fiber lines will not communicate properly. So we do use Verizon on this. So when you do submit your test, if possible, please use a 4G wireless signal test on the Verizon network with your form, so that we can verify that we will be able to communicate with that meter in that location. These meters are long lead time items, and prep time can be 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, at a minimum, you should give us probably 2 to 3 months lead time in order to get these program built and then out to the field prior to seeking the ATI on this. This is the link for the witness test form, for the wireless test form, sorry. And again, it's a one-pager with a screenshot for your for off of the phone to just determine the signal strength in that area. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Jen Kim will go over the standard review process.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, this is Jennifer Kim. I'm one of the study account managers for the standard complex team, and I'll be going through the standard review process. Next slide, please. Yep. So what projects fall under the standard criteria? So any projects greater than 500 kilowatts would automatically fall into this criteria. There's also other items such as requiring a distribution system impact study, requiring substation modifications. If your generator is a non-listed inverter, such as induction, synchronous, or asynchronous, most CHP systems, and essentially any and all projects that would not qualify for the simplified or expedited process. Next slide. So the process steps in the standard process would be pre-application and then application, which at that point will determine it's a standard project, and then engineering review, which would be the impact study, as well as a detailed study if applicable, and then conditional approval, which will be the step to have the ISA drafted and executed. And then once payment is made, then we'll go into design, and then company construction, witness testing, meter installation, registering the assets, and then ATI. Next slide. And so just to kind of go over some of the dates from the tariff that will be following. So the acknowledgement of the receipt of application, like other steps, are going to be 3 days. Typically, it tends to be less than 3 days. And then the reviewing of the application for completeness would be 10 days. And then the screening process with the screening review would be 20 days. And then the delivering of the impact study agreement would be 5 days. And then the impact study itself would be 55 to 60 days or by mutual agreement, depending on the complexity. And if a detailed study is applicable and necessary, then it would be 30 to 60 days or by mutual agreement, depending on the complexity. The ISA would then be delivered in 15 days afterwards. And then essentially the total maximum days can be 135 days, 160 days, 200 days or more, depending on where it started, as well as the complexity of the project. The construction schedule will vary depending on what needs to get done for the project. And then the witness test will be from 10 days when after the company provides approval of the customer provided witness test procedure documents or by mutual agreement if necessary. Next slide. So some general reminders about the standard review path. The impact study, as well as a detailed study, if required, are to determine the electrical impact of the company's on the company APS with the required system modifications, as well as the associated costs to the customer. And then if a project is greater than a megawatt, then the customer application will need to be presented to the ISO New England at the 20 business day mark of the impact study. And the impact study will actually go on hold at this time for an ASO hold until the ISO provides approval, or if an ASO study is necessary, until that is complete. And project size will be based on nameplate reading of the system and can be aggregated. If a project is greater than a megawatt but less than 5 megawatt, it will and does not require a full transmission study, it would be a GNF, versus if an application is greater than 5 megawatts and or requires a full transmission study, it would be needing a PPA as well as a supporting TPPA. And then if substation modifications are required, company does have 60 business days for the study, as well as if estimated construction costs are greater than $1 million, then the study timeline can be adjusted by mutual agreement. You would be notified at the 20 business day review if any of these timeline changes are being impacted to your project. And then the ISA will have the estimated construction timeline and is provided after the study is complete. If we have determined that a detailed study is required, the customer may request for an early ISA. However, do note that this will not have a construction timeline and will begin your payment timeline. And then per the DPU order 1955, which came out last September, the first KAYA payment is due within 60 business days rather than the previous 120 business days. And the KAYA payments will no longer have the 30 business day cure period after the payment due date has passed. And then design begins after the first KAYA payment has been made and this is to determine the details of the system modifications. And easements, permitting, right of way, and such will begin after design and are required to move into construction. And if third parties do not agree to the design and do not approve such easements or permitting or right of way, then it can result in a restudy or a redesign. Next slide. And some reminders about witness testing as well as completion documents. So the most recent checklist will be available on the portal in the link provided. And these documents can be provided in advance to the construction, National Grid construction being complete, but please do note that all must be provided before we can review. And then for any specific questions, definitely do feel free to reach out to your assigned post-ISA account manager for clarification on what's needed. And then just reminders about the witness test checklist. Please make sure you are including nameplate pictures. And also do note that all checklist requirements must be provided, as well as both National Grid and the customer construction, including the muni approval, must be completed prior to being able to schedule a witness test. And then for the compliance document, the asset registration is now part of the compliance documents, just as a reminder. And that National Grid is applying on the customer's behalf for the asset registration, and it typically takes about 5 to 10 business days. And all incentive program projects that are greater than 60 kilowatts, require asset registrations with ISO before ATI is granted, and this is because we can't backdate the payments. And then behind the meter, class 2 and 3 net metering and demand response systems are exempt from being registered as SOGs with ISO. And if AC coupled battery standalone system is generating power onto the grid, then they also need to be registered separately with ISO. Next slide. And then reminders about document revision and restudy. So whenever you are submitting new one lines or site plans, please do note that you should be clouding all changes, including text changes, as well as updating revision blocks. So the revision number and the dates that would be on the border of your drawing, not just your file name. And this is necessary just for us to make sure that we are properly capturing and looking at all the changes that are being made, as well as being able to reference the proper revision and date for the files, especially if something has been printed out, for example. And then all the one lines and site plans do need to have a PE stamp, and this is per our ESB standards. And if you're making changes after a study has been finalized, the customer does need to inform National Grid of the changes via the change request button on the portal, as well as provide the revised documents to determine if a restudy would be necessary. And if we do determine that a restudy is necessary, there would be associated costs and timelines that we would inform you of. And then Please note that restudies can cause impacts to the project costs and timelines, even if the scope doesn't change. We typically have been seeing an increase to both the costs and timelines, especially if the previous study is over a year old. So just be aware that a restudy can cause impacts to your kayak timelines as well as a construction kayak costs as well as a construction timeline. And then all design and construction will be put on hold if it is safely able to be done so for the duration of the restudy until the ISC amendment has been fully executed. And then once the ISC amendment has been fully executed, at that point, we will determine if any rework may be necessary and what the impacts to the timeline would be. And then next slide. All right, I'll pass it off to Sean for his section.
Thank you. So yeah, we've got some organizational changes within CEI. So wanted to take a moment to introduce myself or reintroduce myself for folks that might know me from my previous role working with some of the regulatory changes in Massachusetts. So if we can go to the next slide. So I was, as of June 1st, we made the decision to split our business support team in half. So Vishal, a hero who previously was the manager of business support, is now the manager of the program support team, which retains many of the responsibilities that his team has had traditionally, including pre-ATI activities, first bill setup, initial credit allocations, walking through the first bill with customers to make sure they're understanding all the credits and the allocations and what all the charges mean, as well as the reconciliations when we're confirming the construction cost actual versus estimate. And his team will also continue to address the policy and programmatic changes for the interconnection tariff and the incentive programs. We're also introducing the other half of this team, which is the team that I'm managing, is DER customer support. It will take some of the activities that were previously under business support, as well as some of the activities that were previously under the application development team with George Souza. So after Vishal's team, goes through that first bill walkthrough, we make sure that the original credit allocations that were requested are set up and